On my 73rd birthday, the backyard was perfect. Fairy lights, fried chicken, family laughing under the Georgia sun. Then my husband of 51 years walked in with his secret family, a woman he'd loved for 30 years and 2 kids he called his own. In front of everyone, our daughters, our friends, the whole damn party, he announced he was done pretending. My girls shattered. Guests gasped. Everyone waited for me to break. Instead, I smiled, calm, quiet, and handed him a little navy box. The second he opened it, his hands started shaking. Because I'd known his secret all along, and I'd been waiting 30 years to serve my revenge. Cold, calculated, and ice-cold delicious. Watch till the end. You won't believe what was inside. I turned 73 on the kind of June afternoon that makes you grateful to live in Georgia. The sky was that impossible Carolina blue, not a cloud in sight, and the air carried the sweet, heavy scent of blooming magnolias mixed with fresh-cut grass. Our backyard in the quiet suburbs of Atlanta, same house we'd bought in 1982, same red brick ranch with the wraparound porch, had been transformed into something out of a magazine spread. Fairy lights draped across the oak trees like strings of captured stars. Long folding tables borrowed from the church hall stretched end to end under the shade, covered in my grandmother's lace tablecloths, and groaning under the weight of the feast I'd spent 3 days preparing. There was the fried chicken, crispy, golden, buttermilk-soaked the way my mama taught me, still sizzling faintly on the platters. Collard greens simmered with smoked turkey neck for hours until they melted in your mouth. Cornbread baked in cast-iron skillets, edges crunchy, center soft and buttery. Deviled eggs dusted with paprika, potato salad with just the right tang of mustard, and my famous peach cobbler, bubbling at the edges, the lattice crust flaky and sugar-dusted. I'd even set out pitchers of sweet tea, real Southern sweet tea, so strong it could stand a spoon in, and lemonade for the grandkids who weren't there yet but might show up someday. Friends from First Baptist had come early to help set up. There was Betty Lou from the choir, still wearing her Sunday pearls, even though it was Saturday, fussing over the napkins. Old Mr. Hargrove from next door, retired from the railroad 40 years ago, brought his famous homemade pickles in mason jars. The Millers, who'd lived across the street since before our girls were born, arrived with a cooler of beer and stories about the time Marcus fixed their roof during Hurricane Opal back in '95. Laughter floated across the lawn like fireflies, easy, familiar, the kind that comes from decades of shared potlucks, hospital visits, and prayer chains. My daughters were the heart of it all. Sarah, 48 now, principal at Westlake High, stood near the grill in her sensible khakis and blouse, hair pulled back in a low ponytail, directing traffic like she was running a staff meeting. She'd always been the organized one, color-coded calendars since she was 10. Laura, 45, the nurse at Piedmont Hospital, moved quieter, checking on everyone with that gentle touch she used on patients. She wore a soft sundress the color of hydrangeas, barefoot on the grass, laughing at something Betty Lou said about her latest grandbaby. They both hugged me every time they passed, whispering, "Happy birthday, Mama," like they were still little girls bringing me dandelions from the yard. And then there was Marcus, my husband of 51 years. Tall, silver-haired, still handsome in that distinguished way older men can pull off. Crisp white shirt rolled to the elbows, khakis pressed sharp, loafers polished. He moved through the crowd like he owned every inch of it, shaking hands, slapping backs, telling the same stories he'd told 1,000 times. The one about catching the biggest bass at Lake Lanier in '87, the time he talked the insurance company into paying for a new roof after the hailstorm. People loved him, always had. He had that easy charisma, the kind that made strangers feel like old friends in 30 seconds flat. From the outside, it looked perfect. A golden anniversary +3 celebration. A life well lived. A family that had made it through the hard stuff. Recessions, kids' college tuition, my bout with breast cancer in 2009, and come out stronger. But I'd learned long ago that perfect pictures hide cracks if you look close enough. For weeks leading up to the party, Marcus had been different. Not angry, not cold exactly, just absent. He'd disappear into his study for hours with the door closed, claiming he was catching up on investments. He'd started taking calls on his cell phone out on the back deck at night, voice low, pacing in circles under the security light. Twice he'd announced last-minute business trips to Charlotte, overnight, back the next afternoon. Something about consulting for an old client. He'd come home smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume and restaurant garlic, excuses ready before I even asked. I'd noticed the little things piling up like unpaid bills, a new bottle of cologne in the bathroom cabinet, something spicy I'd never bought him, receipts in his wallet for dinners at places we never went, 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, a hotel key card he forgot to throw away, tucked in the side pocket of his briefcase. And once, late at night when he thought I was asleep, I heard him murmur into the phone, "I know, baby, just a little longer." The words landed like stones in my stomach. I could have confronted him then, could have stormed in, demanded answers, thrown the receipts in his face. But I didn't. I'd learned patience the hard way, raising 2 girls, surviving chemo, watching my parents fade slow. Some storms you don't run toward, you let them come to you. So I smiled when he kissed my cheek goodbye for those trips. I packed him sandwiches like always. I prayed in the quiet hours before dawn, asking God for clarity, for strength, for whatever came next. That afternoon, as the sun dipped lower and the fairy lights started to glow, I stood by the dessert table, slicing the cobbler, watching Marcus laugh with Mr. Hargrove. He caught my eye across the yard and raised his glass of iced tea and a little toast, our private signal since our dating days. I smiled back, the same soft smile I'd given him for half a century. But inside, something tightened, a feeling I couldn't name yet, like the first distant rumble of thunder on a clear day. The guests were arriving in waves now, cars pulling up, hugs and "Happy birthday, Eleanor" ringing out. The kids from the neighborhood chased each other around the oak tree. Someone turned up the Bluetooth speaker, classic Motown, Aretha Franklin belting "Respect." Everything felt right. Except it wasn't. Marcus excused himself around 3:45, saying he needed to grab something from the garage. He disappeared through the side gate, casual as anything. I kept slicing cobbler, handing out plates, chatting with Betty Lou about her roses. Minutes ticked by. 5, 10. Then the gate creaked open again. Heads turned slowly. And everything I thought I knew about my life, the 51 years, the house, the daughters, the laughter, began to tilt. I set the knife down carefully on the tablecloth. The bomb wasn't under the tablecloth after all. It was walking through my gate, holding hands with the man I'd married, the man I'd built a life with, the man who was about to blow it all apart in front of everyone I loved. And I still had one card left to play.
The backyard had settled into that golden late afternoon hush you only get in early summer. Cicadas humming steady in the trees, kids' laughter fading as they chased lightning bugs that weren't out yet, the smell of charcoal smoke and ripening peaches hanging thick in the air. Aretha was still crooning from the speaker, "Chain of Fools," and folks were swaying a little, plates balanced on knees, talking about grandkids and church picnics and how the braids were finally hitting again this season. I was wiping peach cobbler juice off my hands with a paper napkin when Marcus reappeared at the side gate. He didn't come alone. First through was the woman, late 50s, maybe early 60s, hard to tell at a glance because she carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that makes age irrelevant. Dark hair swept back in a neat French twist, silver threads catching the light. Simple navy sundress, sleeveless, hem just below the knee. No jewelry except a thin gold chain at her throat. She walked like she belonged there, chin up, eyes scanning the crowd with calm curiosity rather than nerves. Behind her, holding her hands like bookends, were 2 teenagers. A boy, tall and lanky, maybe 18, wearing a faded black t-shirt and jeans, hair long enough to fall over one eye. And a girl, 16 or so, in cut-off shorts and a cropped white top, braids pulled into a high ponytail, AirPods dangling around her neck like forgotten jewelry. They stopped just inside the gate, 3 figures framed by the climbing roses on the trellis. Marcus stepped up behind them, placed one hand on the boy's shoulder, the other on the girl's, and cleared his throat. Loud, deliberate, the way he used to do before board meetings back when he still wore suits every day. The music kept playing for another few seconds, Aretha hitting that high note. Then someone, I think it was young Tommy Miller, reached over and hit pause on the Bluetooth. Silence dropped like a curtain. Forks rose halfway to mouths. Conversation snuffed out mid-sentence. "Folks," Marcus said, voice carrying clear across the yard the way it always did when he wanted attention. No tremble, no hesitation. Just that steady baritone I'd heard proposed to me in 1973. Read bedtime stories to our girls. Argue property taxes at City Hall. I'd like y'all to meet my other family. A ripple went through the crowd, soft gasps, a choked laugh that died quick, the scrape of a chair leg as someone stood up too fast. "This is Vanessa," he continued, nodding toward the woman, "my partner of 30 years, and these are our children, Marcus Jr. and Leela." He squeezed the kids' shoulders gently, almost proudly. "I've kept them hidden long enough. Today, on Eleanor's birthday, it's time everybody knew the truth." Time didn't stop, but it sure felt like it. The fairy lights flickered on automatically as the sun dipped behind the neighbor's roof, casting tiny golden dots across faces that had gone slack with shock. Betty Lou's hand flew to her mouth, pearls clicking against her knuckles. Mr. Hargrove set his pickle jar down slow, like it might break if he moved too fast. The kids who'd been running stopped dead, staring. Sarah was closest to me. She'd been laughing at something Laura said. Now her plate tilted, a deviled egg rolling off and splitting open on the grass. Her glass of sweet tea slipped from numb fingers. Crash, shards scattering like ice across the stone patio. Laura grabbed her sister's arm so hard I saw Sarah wince, but neither of them looked away from their father.
I stood by the dessert table, carving knife still in my right hand, the blade catching the light. Cobbler steam curled up around me. Everyone's eyes flicked between Marcus and me, waiting for the explosion, the tears, the scream that would shatter the afternoon the way Sarah's glass had shattered. Marcus met my gaze across 30 feet of stunned silence. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Triumph. That small, satisfied tilt to the corner of his mouth, the one he got when he closed a deal or won an argument about whose turn it was to mow the lawn. He expected me to crumble, to wail, to throw something, to give him the public scene he'd clearly rehearsed in his head, a dramatic unraveling that would make him the center of sympathy, the man who'd finally come clean, while I played the betrayed wife left in ruins on her birthday. The teenagers, Marcus Jr. and Lila, looked at me too. The boy's jaw was tight, eyes wary. The girl chewed her bottom lip, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Vanessa kept her chin level, but her fingers tightened around her children's hands. She wasn't gloating. She looked resigned, like she'd known this day would come and had braced for it. Whispers started creeping in from the edges. Oh, Lord have mercy. Did he just say 30 years? Poor Eleanor. On her birthday? That's cold. Someone, maybe one of the church ladies, let out a soft, horrified, "Jesus, take the wheel." Still, I didn't move, didn't speak. The knife felt cool and steady in my palm. Sarah took a step forward, voice cracking like thin ice. "Dad, what the hell is this?" Laura was already crying, quiet the way she did when patients didn't make it. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them. She just stared at the 3 strangers who'd walked into our yard and rewritten her entire childhood in one sentence. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but I raised my free hand, just a small lift of fingers, and the whole yard went still again, every eye on me. I set the knife down on the table with a soft clink. Then I smiled. Not a big smile, not forced or bitter, just a small, calm curve of the lips, the same one I'd given doctors when they told me the cancer was back in '09, the same one I'd given the girls when their daddy missed recitals because of work. The smile that says, "I see you, and I'm still standing." Marcus's triumphant look flickered, just for a second, a tiny crack. because he knew that smile. He'd seen it before. And he suddenly wasn't so sure anymore. The fairy lights twinkled overhead like they didn't know the world had tilted. The cicadas kept singing. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, sharp and lonely. I reached under the table for the small navy blue gift box I'd placed there that morning, wrapped in silver ribbon, no tag, no fuss. And I started walking toward him, one slow step at a time, through the stunned crowd, straight to the man who thought he'd just destroyed me.
The backyard didn't explode the way you'd expect. No one screamed, no one threw a drink in Marcus's face, no one stormed out or dialed 911. What happened instead was worse. Silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums, heavy and absolute, like the moment right after a lightning strike, when the thunder hasn't caught up yet. Aretha's voice had been cut off mid-verse, leaving only the cicadas and the faint rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. The fairy lights glowed on, oblivious, casting soft golden flecks across frozen faces. Plates hovered halfway to mouths. A deviled egg Sarah had dropped earlier lay split open on the grass, like a tiny yellow crime scene. Laura's tears kept coming, silent, steady streams down her cheeks, but she didn't sob, didn't make a sound. She just held Sarah's arm like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I stood by the dessert table, the carving knife set aside now, my hands loose at my sides. The peach cobbler was still warm, steam curled up in lazy spirals. I could smell the cinnamon and brown sugar, the same scent that had filled our kitchen every summer since the girls were small. Funny how the ordinary keeps going when everything else stops.
Marcus held his ground just inside the gate, one hand still on each teenager's shoulder. Vanessa stood beside him, chin level, eyes steady on me. Not defiant, not apologetic, just waiting. Marcus Jr. shifted his weight, the boy's long hair falling forward to hide his expression. Lila chewed the inside of her cheek, glancing between her mother and the crowd like she wanted to disappear. The guests formed a loose semicircle now, unconsciously stepping back as if the three newcomers carried something contagious. Betty Lou's hand stayed pressed to her mouth, pearls trembling. Mr. Hargrove had set his mason jar of pickles on the picnic table so carefully you'd think it was fine china. His knuckles were white around the lid. The Millers stood shoulder to shoulder, her arm looped through his, the way they always did when life got hard. Young Tommy Miller, who'd paused the music, looked like he regretted ever touching the speaker. Whispers started then, small and scattered, like the first drops before a downpour. Oh, sweet Jesus, 30 years? Lord, he brought them here on her birthday. That's just cruel. Poor Eleanor, look at her face.
They all kept glancing at me, waiting for the dam to break, waiting for the tears, the accusations, the collapse that would give this awful moment its proper shape. A betrayed wife undone, a philandering husband exposed, a scandal to whisper about at church for years. That's what they expected. That's what Marcus expected. His eyes stayed locked on mine, that smug little tilt still at the corner of his mouth, daring me to react. He'd rehearsed this in his head, I could tell. The big reveal, the dramatic confession, the moment he stepped out of the shadows and into the light as the honest man who'd finally chosen truth over lies. He thought my silence was shock, paralysis, defeat. He was wrong. I felt the weight of every eye on me, but I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink hard. Instead, I let the silence stretch, longer, heavier, until it became its own thing, a living presence in the yard. I let it settle over Marcus like a cold fog. I let it wrap around Vanessa and the kids until their shoulders hunched just a fraction. I let it press against my daughters until Sarah's grip on Laura tightened and Laura's tears slowed, not from comfort, but from confusion. Because I wasn't frozen. I was choosing. Every second I stood there calm was a second I took back from him. Every breath I took without breaking was a brick in the wall I'd been building for decades. I'd cried my tears in private years ago, alone in the attic with those plain brown envelopes from the private investigator, alone in the car after following him to that house in Marietta, alone on the bathroom floor the night I found the hotel keycard and realized the perfume wasn't from a client lunch. I'd spent my grief quietly, methodically, the way you fold laundry or can peaches, one careful step at a time. By the time the real moment arrived, there were no tears left to give him. Sarah broke first. She took one shaky step forward, her voice raw. "Dad, how could you do this? To Mom? To us? On her birthday?" The words cracked the air like a whip. Laura nodded, silent agreement, her lips trembling. Marcus opened his mouth, ready with the speech, I'm sure. Duty versus love, staying for the children, finally being true to himself. But before he could speak, someone else murmured, "This is awful." Then another voice, louder, "That man's got no shame." A church lady in the back whispered, "Lord, forgive him, but I don't know if I can." The tide was turning, not toward him, toward me. Marcus's hand slipped from Marcus Jr.'s shoulder. Just a fraction, but I saw it. The boy noticed too. He looked up at his father, uncertain now. Lila's eyes darted to Vanessa, searching for reassurance that didn't come. I took one small step forward, then another. The crowd parted without me asking. I walked straight through them, past Betty Lou, past the Millers, past my daughters who reached for me but didn't quite touch, until I was maybe 10 feet from Marcus and his other family. Still smiling, that same small, calm smile.
His triumphant expression flickered again, longer this time. A shadow crossed his face. He'd expected fireworks, hysteria, something he could point to and say, "See, this is why I had to leave." Instead, he got quiet, control, the one thing he'd never been able to take from me. Vanessa's gaze met mine. For the first time, something shifted in her eyes. Not fear exactly, the recognition. She knew I wasn't the fragile wife he described in their late-night calls. She saw the woman who'd waited 30 years without a single outburst. I reached under the table where the navy blue gift box waited, small, elegant, silver ribbon catching the fairy lights. I lifted it slowly, deliberately, and I started walking the last few steps toward him. The silence deepened. No one breathed. Marcus's hands twitched at his sides. He still didn't understand, but he was about to. I didn't wake up one morning knowing my husband had built a second life. It didn't hit like a thunderclap. It crept in quiet, the way kudzu takes over a fence. Slow at first, then impossible to ignore. The first real crack appeared in the spring of 1995. I remember the date because it was the same week our Sarah graduated high school. Cap and gown, proud tears, the whole ceremony under the big oak at Westlake High. Marcus had been distant for months, but I blamed the new consulting gig he'd picked up. "Travel's part of it, Ellie," he'd say, kissing my forehead before heading to the airport. "Pays for college, pays for the house. You know that." He started going to Charlotte twice a month, always Tuesday to Thursday, back in time for Friday night supper. He'd come home tired, suitcase in hand, smelling faintly of airport coffee and something floral I couldn't place. I'd unpack for him like always, habit from 22 years of marriage, hanging shirts, sorting socks. That's when I found the first receipt. Tucked in the inside pocket of his navy blazer, a dinner slip from a place called the Velvet Room in uptown Charlotte. 2 ribeyes, medium rare, 2 glasses of Cabernet, 1 creme brulee with 2 spoons. Date, April 11th, 1995. Tip generous, 25%. No client name scribbled in the memo line, just dinner meeting. But the handwriting on the receipt was Marcus's. Same looping M, same little flourish on the 9. I sat on the edge of our bed that night, receipt in hand, while he showered. The water ran long. Steam slipped under the door. I stared at the paper until the ink blurred. Then I folded it small, tucked it into the zippered pouch of my sewing kit, the one place he never looked, and said nothing. Over the next year, the clues stacked like cordwood. A second receipt,
Same restaurant, different night. A dry cleaning ticket for a lipstick stain on a collar he swore was from shaking hands with a client who wore too much makeup. Phone calls he took in the study with the door shut tight. I'd hear the low murmur of his voice, then laughter, soft, intimate laughter that didn't belong in our house. I never eavesdropped, not at first. I told myself it was nothing. Men travel. Men have business dinners. Men come home smelling like other people's perfumes sometimes. I baked extra peach cobbler. I ironed his shirts crisper. I smiled wider when he walked through the door. But doubt has roots. Once they take hold, they spread. The real turn came in October of 2002. Laura was away at nursing school in Augusta. Sarah had just started her first teaching job in Macon. The house felt too quiet, too big. Marcus was on another Charlotte trip, 3 days this time. He'd left his briefcase on the kitchen counter when he rushed out for the airport shuttle. I didn't mean to snoop. I was just putting it away in the hall closet like I always did. The phone rang inside the case, his cell, the old flip kind with the antenna. I flipped it open without thinking. The screen lit up. Ness, home safe? A text message. No last name, just Ness. I stared at it. My thumb hovered over the reply button. The phone buzzed again, same sender. Miss you already. Call when you land. Love you. My heart didn't race. It slowed. A cold, deliberate thud. I closed the phone, set the briefcase down, walked to the study, closed the door behind me, pressed my ear to the wood. Not the bedroom door this time, but the study, where he sometimes took calls when I was supposedly asleep. Nothing that night. But 3 weeks later, he was home late from another trip. I waited until he was in the shower again. Always the shower first, like he needed to wash the day off before touching me. I went to the study. The door wasn't locked. His laptop sat open on the desk, screensaver swirling. I moved the mouse. Email open. Inbox. A thread from v.wilkes@charlotte.net. Subject: Our weekend. I clicked. Photos loaded slow on the dial-up. A little boy, maybe 4, sitting on Marcus's shoulders at a park, laughing, arms outstretched. The same woman from the dinner receipts beside them, dark hair loose, smiling up at Marcus like he hung the moon. Another picture, the 3 of them on a porch swing, the boy asleep between them, her head on Marcus's shoulder. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I hit print. 3 copies, 1 for me, 2 backups. Then I closed the laptop, walked back to our bedroom, slid under the covers before he finished toweling off. He climbed in beside me, kissed my temple. Love you, Ellie.
Love you too, I said, voice steady. The next morning I drove to the library. Public computer, no trace. Looked up the address from the background of one photo, a tidy ranch house on a cul-de-sac in Marietta, 30 minutes north of Atlanta. Not Charlotte at all. I didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, I started keeping records. Every receipt I found, I photocopied. Every late-night call he took outside, I noted the time and duration in a small spiral notebook I hid behind the canned peaches in the pantry. When he mentioned investments that needed cash, I transferred small amounts from my personal savings, my gardening fund, I called it, so he wouldn't notice the joint account dipping. By 2008, I had enough to hire a private investigator, a quiet man named Ray Donnelly out of Decatur. Cash payments, no paper trail. He delivered envelopes to a P.O. box I rented under my maiden name, Eleanor Hayes again, like slipping back into an old coat. The photos were worse than I'd imagined. Marcus at soccer games, Marcus at school plays, Marcus celebrating birthdays with cake and balloons and a family that looked just like the one we'd built, only younger, fresher, unscarred. I kept every picture, every report, in a steel lockbox under the attic floorboards. I labeled it insurance. Not for money.
For the day he decided to humiliate me in public. Because I knew men like Marcus. They don't leave quietly. They leave with fireworks. Big, dramatic, meant to burn the old life down so the new one can rise clean from the ashes. I waited, patient, silent, smiling when he came home. Because the best revenge isn't rushed. It's timed. And 30 years is a long clock to wind. Once I had those first photos from 2002, the little boy on Marcus's shoulders, the woman laughing beside him, I couldn't unsee them. They lived behind my eyes every time he kissed me goodnight, every time he said, "I love you, Ellie," like it still meant the same thing it had in 1973. But I didn't rage. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't call my sister in Savannah, or my preacher, or even my best friend Betty Lou. I did what women of my generation were taught to do when the foundation cracked. I watched. I waited. And I gathered.
By 2008, the evidence had grown too heavy to ignore. Receipts had turned into bank statements, showing transfers, small at first, then bigger, from our joint savings to an account I didn't recognize. Investments, he'd say when I asked about the dips. Real estate up in Charlotte. Good returns coming. I nodded, smiled, poured him coffee. Then I started my own ledger in the back of an old recipe book. Dates, amounts, account numbers, copied in pencil, so faint you'd miss it unless you knew where to look. That spring, I made the call. Ray Donnelly, private investigator, ex-cop from Decatur. I found him through a discreet ad in the back of the Yellow Pages. Nothing flashy, just discreet services, matrimonial and background. I met him at a Waffle House off I-285, cash in an envelope, no last names exchanged beyond firsts. "I need pictures," I told him. "Proof, addresses, school records if you can get them. Quiet." He nodded once, took the money, said he'd deliver in plain manila envelopes to a P.O. box I rented the next day, under Eleanor Hayes, my maiden name, the girl I used to be before I became Mrs. Marcus Mayfield.
The first packet arrived 2 weeks later. Inside, 8 glossy photos, time-stamped. Marcus at a Little League game in Marietta, kneeling beside the same boy from the old email pictures, now maybe 12, adjusting his batting helmet. Marcus carrying a birthday cake into a modest brick ranch house, balloons tied to the mailbox. Vanessa opening the door, smiling that same easy smile, arms around his neck like it was the most natural thing in the world. Another shot, the family at the mall food court. Marcus, Vanessa, the boy, and a little girl, maybe 6, all sharing French fries, laughing at something on Marcus's phone. My hands didn't shake when I looked at them. I spread them out on the attic floor under the bare bulb, studied each one like a map. Then I locked them in the steel box I'd bought at Home Depot, fireproof, combination lock, hidden under a loose floorboard beneath the old cedar chest, where I kept my wedding dress wrapped in tissue. I kept going. Over the next decade, Ray sent more. Birth certificates. Marcus Jr., born 1996, Lila Grace, born 2002. No father listed on either, just unknown scratched in the blank. But the timing lined up too perfect with Marcus's trips. School enrollment records from Marietta City Schools. A mortgage statement for the house on Willow Creek Lane. Deed in both names, Marcus Mayfield and Vanessa Wilkes. Utility bills paid from our joint checking account through an online transfer I'd never seen.
The money was the worst part. By 2012, I traced over $180,000 siphoned off in bits and pieces. College funds we'd started for the girls diverted, retirement contributions skimmed, even the emergency cushion we'd built after my cancer scare in 2009. He'd forged my signature on some of the withdrawal slips, others he'd done online when I was at chemo or asleep. I printed screen captures, notarized copies of bank statements, highlighted the patterns in yellow marker. Everything went into the box. I never told Sarah or Laura. How could I? They still called him Daddy, with that same trust they'd had at 5 and 10 and 15. They still hugged him at holidays, still asked his advice on jobs and boyfriends and house repairs. I protected that. I protected them. If I blew it up too soon, they'd lose both parents in one blast. So I carried it alone. I learned things about Vanessa, too. Not from jealousy, but from necessity. She'd been a paralegal when they met, back in the early 90s at a conference in Atlanta. Never married before. The children were hers biologically, that much was clear. But Marcus wasn't on the birth certificates. That told me something. He wanted the family without the full responsibility. No child support on record. No legal ties that could drag him into court. Just love on his terms.
By 2015, I took the next step. I drove to a DNA testing lab in Buckhead. Quiet Saturday morning. Cash payment again. I'd saved strands of Marcus's hair from his brush, clippings from the boys' soccer socks Ray had discreetly collected. Mailed them off anonymous.
Results came 6 weeks later. Marcus Jr., 0% match to Marcus Mayfield. Paternity probability, 0%. I did Lila the next year. Same result. Another envelope for the box. In 2019, I met with a divorce attorney. Female, mid-40s, recommended by a friend who'd gone through it. We sat in her office overlooking Peachtree Street, blinds half closed. I laid out the box. Every photo, every statement, every forged signature. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Eleanor, you've got grounds for everything. Adultery, financial fraud, dissipation of marital assets. We can freeze accounts, file quietly, wait for him to make the first public move. Timing is key." I nodded. I want to wait until he tries to humiliate me, until he thinks he's won. She smiled, small, knowing, smart. We'll draft the papers now. You sign when you're ready. They'll sit in my safe until then. I left with copies tucked in my purse, originals locked away. Through it all, I kept the house running. I cooked Sunday dinners. I went to church. I smiled at Marcus across the breakfast table. I let him think I was the same trusting wife he'd married. Let him believe the secret was still his to control.
Because secrets only have power when they're hidden, and mine wasn't hidden anymore. It was loaded, waiting for the day he walked into my backyard with his other family and tried to burn my life down in front of everyone. That's when I'd hand him the box and watch him realize he'd never really known me at all. The silence in the backyard didn't last forever. It cracked first with Sarah's voice, sharp, raw, the way it used to sound when she was 12 and someone had hurt her feelings at school. She stepped forward from where she'd been standing frozen beside the dessert table, her sensible khakis now dusted with grass from where she'd knelt to pick up the broken glass earlier. Her face was blotchy red, eyes wide and shining with the kind of disbelief that hits harder than anger. "Dad," she said again, louder this time, the word breaking in the middle. "What the hell is this?" Marcus flinched, just a tiny twitch at the corner of his eye, but he didn't back down. He kept his hands on the teenager's shoulders like they were anchors keeping him steady. Vanessa stayed quiet beside him, her gaze flickering between her children and my daughters, calculating something I couldn't read yet.
Sarah kept going, voice rising with every step she took toward him. "You bring strangers into Mama's birthday party, our family party, and tell us they're your real family? 30 years? You've been lying to us for 30 years?" Laura hadn't moved yet. She stood rooted to the spot near the picnic table, arms wrapped tight around herself like she was holding her own ribs together. Tears streamed down her face in silent rivers. She didn't bother wiping them. Her nurse's hands, the ones that had held dying patients' hands steady, that had changed IVs and bandaged wounds, trembled now. She looked small suddenly, like the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. Marcus raised one palm, the gesture he always used when he wanted to calm a room, preacher-like, authoritative. "Sarah, Laura, I know this is a shock, but I stayed with your mother out of duty, out of responsibility. Vanessa," he glanced at her, softening, "Vanessa is my real love. These kids, Marcus Jr. and Leela, they are my legacy, my blood. I'm done pretending. I'm done living half a life." The words landed like punches. Sarah sucked in a breath so sharp it sounded painful. Laura finally made a sound, a small, broken sob that escaped before she could clamp it down. "Duty?" Sarah repeated, voice cracking on the word. "You call 51 years of marriage duty? You call raising us, coming to every game and recital and graduation, duty? You let us think you loved Mama the way we loved you both, and now you stand here, on her birthday, and say it was all pretend?"
Guests shifted uncomfortably. Betty Lou whispered something to Mr. Hargrove. He nodded slow, jaw tight. The Millers exchanged a look, long-married understanding passing between them without words. Someone in the back muttered, "That's low, Marcus, real low." Marcus didn't flinch this time. He squared his shoulders. "I never said I didn't care for your mother. I provided, I stayed. But love, real love, that's different. I couldn't keep hiding it, not anymore." Laura finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, too quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried because the yard was still so hushed.
"How long, Daddy? How long have you had another family while we thought we were yours?" He hesitated, just a beat. "Since before you were born, Laura. Marcus Jr. came first, then Lila. I built something real on the side, something I couldn't walk away from." Sarah laughed then, a short, bitter sound that didn't match her face. "On the side, like a hobby, like you were collecting stamps or fishing gear, not raising children, not building a life behind our backs." The teenagers, Marcus Jr. and Lila, looked smaller now, the boy's shoulders hunched. He stared at the grass like it might swallow him. Lila's eyes were huge, wet, darting between her mother and the two women who were suddenly her half-sisters. Vanessa squeezed their hands tighter, but she didn't speak. Not yet. I watched my daughters break in front of me, and it hurt worse than anything Marcus had said. Sarah's face crumpled. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth like she could hold the sobs in. Laura swayed a little, like the ground had tilted under her. I wanted to run to them, wrap them both in my arms the way I did when they were small and the world felt too big. But I stayed where I was. One more minute. Just one more. Because this wasn't just about them. It was about the lie he'd fed us all, and I needed him to finish digging the hole before I handed him the shovel to climb out or bury himself deeper. Sarah turned to me then, eyes pleading. "Mama, say something, please. Tell him he's wrong. Tell him this isn't real." I met her gaze, held it. Then I looked at Laura, who was shaking now, silent tears still falling. I gave them the smallest nod, the one that said, "I see you. I'm here. I'm not leaving." Then I turned back to Marcus. He was watching me again, waiting for the meltdown, waiting for me to confirm his story, the cold, betrayed wife who'd driven him to this other life. Instead, I reached under the table, slow, deliberate, and lifted the navy blue gift box. Silver ribbon glinted in the fairy lights. No bow, no card, just quiet certainty. I walked toward him through the parted crowd, past Betty Lou's wide eyes, past Mr. Hargrove's clenched jaw, past my daughters, who reached for me but let me pass because they knew, somehow, they knew I had something. Marcus's eyes narrowed when he saw the box. Confusion flickered across his face, replacing the triumph. "What's that?" he asked, voice lower now. I stopped a few feet away, close enough that only he and his other family could hear my words clearly. "Happy birthday to me," I said softly. "I already knew, darling. This is for you." I held the box out. His hand rose slowly, almost reluctant. Fingers closed around it. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. The teenagers stared. Vanessa's breath caught, soft, audible. The yard held its breath again. Because the real storm wasn't the confession he just made. It was the one I was about to unleash. And my daughters, my brave, broken girls, were about to see their mother wasn't the victim he'd painted. She was the one holding the match.
The crowd had formed a loose circle by then, the kind you see at accident scenes on the highway, people drawn in by shock, unable to look away, afraid to get too close. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, like they were trying to pretend this was still a party. The cicadas had quieted, as if even they knew better than to interrupt what was coming. My peach cobbler sat forgotten on the table, steam long gone, the edges starting to crust over in the cooling evening air. I walked the last few feet to Marcus with the navy blue gift box balanced on my open palm. No flourish, no dramatic flourish of ribbon, just steady steps across the stone patio, heels clicking soft against the irregular slabs we'd laid together back in '89, when the girls were small and the yard was still mostly dirt. Sarah and Laura stood off to my left now, arms around each other. Sarah's face flushed and fierce, Laura's pale and tear-streaked. But they didn't try to stop me. They sensed it, the way daughters sometimes do. This wasn't their fight anymore. It was mine. Marcus watched me approach. His hand was still half raised from when he tried to gesture calm to the girls earlier. Now it hovered awkward in the air before dropping to his side.
The smug tilt was gone from his mouth, replaced by something uncertain, almost wary, like a man who'd thrown a match into dry grass, expecting a quick blaze, and instead felt the wind shift. I stopped close enough that I could see the faint tremor in his jaw, the way his silver hair caught the light and made him look older than his 75 years. Vanessa stood a step behind him, her grip on the teenager's hands white-knuckled now. Marcus Jr., the boy who carried my husband's name but not his blood, kept his eyes on the ground. Lila looked straight at me, wide-eyed, like she was seeing a ghost she hadn't expected to meet. "Here," I said, voice low but clear enough to carry to the edges of the yard. I wrapped it myself. No card. Didn't seem necessary. I extended the box. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then his fingers closed around it, slow, reluctant, like he was handling something that might bite. The silver ribbon shimmered under the lights as he turned it over in his hands. He glanced up at me once, searching my face for the crack, the hysteria, the confirmation that he'd won this round. He found nothing but that same small, calm smile I'd worn since the gate first opened. "Go on," I said softly. "Open it." The backyard held its collective breath again. Betty Lou's pearls clicked faintly as she shifted. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat once, low and uncomfortable. Somewhere behind me, a child asked a parent what was happening. The parent shushed them quick. Marcus tugged the ribbon. It came away smooth, no knots. He always hated when I tied them too tight. He lifted the lid.
Inside, nothing flashy. No explosion of confetti. No divorce papers slapped on top like a slap in the face. Just one single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges from years of careful storage. A DNA test result dated October 15th, 2015. Laboratory letterhead crisp even after a decade. Black ink, clinical font. Paternity probability, 0%. Marcus Mayfield, not a biological match to Marcus Mayfield Jr. Beneath it, a second sheet, more recent, dated March 2024. Lila Grace Wilkes, same lab, same result, 0%. Not his. Tucked under those was a slim black flash drive. No label except one word in my neat handwriting, evidence. Marcus's hand started to shake. Not a tremble, a real, visible quiver that made the box lid rattle against his fingers. He stared down at the papers like they were written in a language he'd forgotten. Color drained from his face in slow motion, leaving him gray under the fairy lights. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I spoke again, still quiet, still calm. I ran the tests myself. Hair from your brush. Strands from the kids' soccer socks your friend Ray collected for me back in 2015. Mailed anonymous. Results don't lie, Marcus. They never have. Vanessa made a small sound, half gasp, half choke. She leaned forward, trying to see over his shoulder. Her eyes widened when they landed on the papers. What is this? Marcus couldn't answer. His mouth worked soundlessly. The teenagers turned to their mother, confusion twisting their faces. Marcus Jr. stepped back half a pace. "Mom?" She shook her head once, sharp, disbelieving, then reached for the box. Marcus didn't resist when she pulled the papers free. She scanned them fast, eyes flicking left to right, then froze. The color left her face, too. I kept my gaze on Marcus. There's more on the drive. Bank statements, 30 years of transfers from our joint accounts to hers. Forged signatures on withdrawal slips. Mortgage records for the house in Marietta. Life insurance policies you changed in 2010, naming her beneficiary instead of me. And the divorce papers I filed 6 months ago, quietly, through my attorney. All they needed was your public confession to make them final. You just gave it to me, in front of witnesses. His knees buckled, just a fraction, before he caught himself against the gatepost. The box slipped from his fingers. I reached out and caught it before it hit the ground. Didn't want the evidence scattered like confetti. The crowd erupted then. Not loud, not chaotic, but a low wave of murmurs that grew. Lord have mercy. He's been lying to everybody. She knew? All this time? Someone started a slow clap, tentative at first, then steadier. A few more joined. Not celebration, recognition,
respect for the woman who'd waited decades to serve justice cold. Sarah stepped up beside me, voice thick. "Mama, you knew?" I nodded once, since before Marcus Jr. could walk.
Laura came next, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because some truths hurt worse when they're forced on children," I said. "I wanted to protect you, and I wanted him to think he'd won, right up until the moment he lost." Marcus looked at me then, really looked. Not as the quiet wife he'd taken for granted, not as the woman he'd planned to humiliate, but as the stranger who'd outplayed him at his own long game. His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. How long?" I smiled again, small, serene. "Long enough." Then I turned to my daughters, opened my arms. They stepped into them, Sarah fierce and trembling, Laura soft and broken, and I held them tight, while the yard spun slowly around us. The box stayed in my hand, empty now. But the weight, that was gone.
Marcus held the open box like it weighed 100 pounds. His fingers, those long, steady fingers that once held mine at the altar, that once cradled our newborn girls, curled white-knuckled around the edges. The navy lid dangled from his thumb, silver ribbon trailing like a spent fuse. The fairy lights overhead caught the sheen of sweat breaking across his forehead. For the first time in 51 years, I saw fear in his eyes, real fear, not the bluster he wore like armor, not the confidence of a man who thought he'd scripted the ending. He stared down at the 2 yellowed sheets of paper resting on the black flash drive, the DNA results, the cold black and white numbers that stripped away the last illusion he'd clung to. Vanessa leaned in first. She'd been silent through the whole confession, stoic, almost regal, but now she reached past him, impatient, and snatched the top sheet. Her eyes scanned fast. Laboratory seal, date, names, percentages, 0%. She blinked once, twice. Then her hand started to tremble too. The paper crinkled under her grip. "Marcus?" Her voice came out thin, higher than I'd expected from the woman in the photos, always smiling, always composed. "What is this?"
He couldn't answer. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, a fish gasping on dry land. Marcus Jr., the boy who'd carried his name like a badge, stepped closer. "Mom, what's going on?" Lila clutched her mother's arm tighter, braids swinging as she looked from face to face. "Dad?" Vanessa turned the second sheet over. Lila's results. Same lab, same devastating 0. She read it slower this time, lips moving silently over the words. When she finished, she looked up at Marcus. Not angry yet, not fully understanding, but the first fracture had appeared in her calm. "You said," she whispered, "you said they were yours." Marcus tried to speak. "Ness, I thought—" "You thought?" Sarah cut in from beside me, voice like a blade. She'd stepped forward again, Laura right with her now, 2 sentinels flanking their mother. "You thought what? That lying for 30 years would magically make it true?"
The crowd murmured louder now, shock turning to outrage in slow waves. Betty Lou clutched her pearls so hard I thought they'd snap. Mr. Hargrove muttered something about no-account scoundrel. A few phones came out, discreet but recording. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was spectacle. I stayed quiet, let it unfold. Vanessa thrust the papers back at him. "Explain this, Marcus, right now." He looked at her, really looked, and something in his face crumpled. I didn't know, I swear. The timing, you and Rick, I thought—" "Rick?" Vanessa's voice cracked on the name. High school sweetheart, the one she'd never quite let go of, even after Marcus swept in with promises and weekend getaways. I'd learned that detail from Ray's reports years ago. Old yearbook photos, old letters tucked in a drawer Ray had photographed. Rick Harlan, truck driver now, living in Gastonia. The real father, according to the science Marcus had never bothered to question. Vanessa's knees went weak,
She sank onto the low stone wall that bordered the rose garden, pulling the kids down with her. Marcus Jr. wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Lila buried her face in her mother's neck. They looked so young suddenly, so small. Marcus turned back to me. His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the rising whispers. You did this? You tested them?
6 months after Marcus Jr. turned 18, I said evenly. I waited until they were adults. Didn't want to drag children into adult lies. Lila's was last year. Same result. He stared at the flash drive like it was a live grenade. What else is on there? Everything, I told him. Every transfer you made from our accounts. $412,000 over 30 years, give or take. Every forged signature on the withdrawal forms. The mortgage you co-signed on Willow Creek Lane. The life insurance policy you switched in 2010. Me removed, her added. The emails, the photos, the hotel receipts, the phone records, and the divorce petition I filed in Fulton County 6 months ago. Grounds, adultery, fraud, dissipation of marital assets. All it needed was your public admission of the affair. You just gave 50 witnesses exactly that. His legs gave out then. He sat hard on the edge of the picnic table, right where the peach cobbler sat untouched, elbows on knees, head in hands. The box slipped from his lap to the grass. I didn't pick it up this time. Sarah knelt beside me, voice shaking but strong. Mama, how long have you carried this? Since 2002, I said, the first real proof, but I suspected longer. Laura wiped her eyes again. And you never said anything? Not once? I said plenty, to myself, to God, to a good lawyer and a better investigator, but not to you girls, not until he forced the moment. I wanted you to have a father who loved you, even if the love was half a lie. I wanted to protect what was left. Marcus looked up at me then, eyes red-rimmed, face ashen. You could have confronted me, years ago. Why wait? Because confrontation gives a man like you a chance to rewrite the story, I said. To play the victim, to gaslight, to charm his way out. I didn't want charm. I wanted truth. And truth needs witnesses. You gave me the stage. I just brought the script. Vanessa stood slowly, steadying herself on the kid's shoulders. She looked at me, not with hate, but with something closer to exhausted understanding. You knew everything. Enough, I said. She nodded once. Then she turned to Marcus. We're leaving. Marcus reached for her arm. Ness, don't. She pulled away. You lied to me too. For 30 years. The teenagers helped her toward the gate. Marcus Jr. shot one last look back at Marcus. Confusion. Betrayal. A flicker of pity. Lila didn't look back at all. Guests started to drift away. Awkward goodbyes. Pats on my shoulder. Murmurs of, "You're stronger than steel, Eleanor." Betty Lou hugged me tight. Call me tomorrow, honey. We'll pray. Sarah and Laura stayed close, one on each side. Sarah slipped her hand into mine. Laura rested her head on my shoulder. Marcus sat alone now, staring at the scattered papers on the grass. The box lay open beside him, like an empty casket. I walked over one last time, leaned down so only he could hear. You thought you were the one with the secrets, Marcus. But silence isn't weakness, it's patience. And patience always wins when the lie runs out of breath. I straightened. Then I turned away, back to my daughters, back to the house, back to the life I'd protected for so long. The fairy lights kept twinkling. The night kept falling. And for the first time in 30 years, I breathed easy. The moment Marcus's knees hit the picnic bench, the spell broke. The backyard didn't erupt in shouts or chaos. No one threw punches, no one stormed the gate in fury. What happened was slower, more devastating. The slow collapse of everything he'd built on sand. The fairy lights kept glowing, soft and mocking, turning the whole scene into something almost dreamlike. But the dream had cracked wide open, and the pieces were falling fast. Vanessa stood first. She'd been sitting on the low stone wall with the kids pressed against her, but now she rose like a woman waking from a long sleep she hadn't wanted. Her navy sundress caught the breeze,
She smoothed it once, automatic, the way you do when you're trying to hold yourself together. She looked at Marcus, not with the love he'd always counted on, but with the cold clarity of someone who'd just read the fine print on a contract she'd signed blind. "You lied," she said. Not loud, not screaming, just flat, final. To me, to them. She nodded toward Marcus Jr. and Lila without looking at them. 30 years of lies.
Marcus lifted his head. His face was gray, eyes glassy. "Ness, I didn't know about the tests. You thought they were yours because it suited you," she cut in, "because it made the story prettier. You never questioned it. You never asked for proof. You just took what you wanted and paid for it with her money." She jerked her chin toward me. "My money too, I guess, since I lived in that house you bought with her savings." Marcus Jr. stood up slowly, taller than his father now, shoulders broad from years of sports Marcus had coached on weekends. "Mom, is it true? About Rick?" Vanessa's breath hitched. She reached for her son's hand, squeezed it hard. "I don't know, baby. I thought Marcus was your daddy, all these years." Her voice cracked on the last word. "But the tests don't lie." Lila started crying then, quiet, hiccuping sobs that broke my heart a little. She buried her face in her brother's shirt. Marcus Jr. wrapped both arms around her and their mother, forming a small, tight circle that shut Marcus out completely. Sarah stepped forward, voice thick with unshed tears. "You took everything from us, Dad. Our childhood memories, our trust, and you gave it to people who aren't even yours by blood." Marcus opened his mouth, maybe to defend himself, maybe to beg, but no words came. He looked around the yard like he was seeing it for the first time. The guests who'd once toasted his name, now staring with pity or disgust. The table still laden with food nobody wanted anymore. The fairy lights he'd helped me string last week, now mocking the wreckage. Someone started applauding. Slow, deliberate claps from the back. Mr. Hargrove. Then Betty Lou joined in, pearls clicking with each sharp smack of her palms. A few more followed, not cheering exactly, but acknowledging. Respect for the woman who'd waited in silence while the man she loved built a castle of cards on her back. Vanessa turned to me. Our eyes met across the short distance. No hate there, no triumph either, just exhaustion and a flicker of something like gratitude. "I didn't know you knew," she said quietly. I thought you were in the dark, like me." "I was," I told her, "for a long time. Then I wasn't." She nodded once. Then she gathered her children closer. "We're going." Marcus reached out. Reflex, desperation. "Ness, wait." "Don't touch me," she said, stepping back. "Not tonight, not ever again, unless it's through lawyers." The three of them walked toward the gate, slow, heads high despite the tears. Marcus Jr. paused at the latch, looked back at the man he'd called Dad his whole life. For a second, I thought he might say something forgiving. Instead, he just shook his head once, small, final, and followed his mother and sister out. The gate clicked shut behind them. The applause died away. Guests started murmuring goodbyes, awkward hugs, promises to call tomorrow, pats on my arm like I was fragile china. Betty Lou squeezed me tight. "You need anything, honey, you call, day or night." Mr. Hargrove tipped his hat, old school gentleman even in scandal. Stronger than most, Eleanor, always were. One by one they drifted toward the driveway, cars starting up soft in the night. The fairy lights stayed on, the music long forgotten. Sarah and Laura stayed. They hadn't let go of me since I'd handed Marcus the box. Sarah's arm was around my waist. Laura's head rested on my shoulder. They were still crying, quiet now, the kind of tears that come after the worst has passed. "Mama," Sarah whispered, "why didn't you tell us sooner? We could have helped. We could have—" "Because you were children," I said gently. "Even when you weren't little anymore, you were still my children. I didn't want you carrying this weight, not until it was time to set it down." Laura lifted her head. "And now?"
Now it's down, I said, and we pick up what's left. Marcus hadn't moved from the bench. He sat hunched, elbows on knees, staring at the scattered papers on the grass like they might rearrange themselves into a different story. The box lay open beside him, empty, lit askew. I walked over one last time. My daughters followed, close enough to catch me if I faltered. I didn't. I stopped in front of him. He looked up, eyes red, face wrecked. For the first time, he looked old, truly old. You thought this would break me, I said softly. You thought bringing them here, on my birthday, in front of everyone, would make me the villain in your story, the cold wife, the obstacle. But you forgot something, Marcus. He swallowed. What? I've been writing my own story for a long time, and you were never the hero. I turned away. Sarah spoke then, voice steady despite the tears. We're done here, Dad. Don't come back to this house. Not tonight. Not ever, unless we say so. Laura added, quieter but no less firm. You don't get to play family man anymore. Not with us. Marcus didn't argue. He just nodded. Once, slow, like a man accepting sentence. We walked back toward the house together, me in the middle, my girls on either side. The yard emptied behind us. Cars pulled away. Lights flicked off one by one. Inside, the kitchen still smelled of fried chicken and cobbler. The clock on the wall ticked steady. Life kept moving. I poured 3 glasses of bourbon, good stuff I'd kept hidden in the pantry for years, handed one to each girl. To new chapters, I said, raising mine. They clinked glasses with me, and for the first time in 30 years, the weight on my shoulders lifted clean away. Outside, Marcus sat alone in the dark. The fallout had only just begun. The last car pulled out of the driveway around 9:30. Headlights swept across the front porch like search beams, then vanished down the quiet suburban street. The fairy lights still glowed in the backyard, but no one had bothered to turn them off. They twinkled on an empty lawn, plates scattered, napkins fluttering like white flags of surrender, the long picnic table looking abandoned in the moonlight. Inside the house, the kitchen light spilled yellow onto the back steps. That was the only warmth left. Sarah and Laura stayed. They didn't ask if they could. They just did. We sat at the kitchen table, the same oak one Marcus had built in the garage when Sarah was learning to walk, the one scarred with crayon marks and holiday dinners and every milestone we'd celebrated together. I poured 3 more fingers of bourbon into mismatched glasses. No ice, no mixers, just the burn we all needed right then. Sarah spoke first. Mama, I don't even know where to start. I took a slow sip. The bourbon hit smooth and smoky, steadying the last tremble in my hands. Start wherever feels right, baby. There's no script for this. Laura traced the rim of her glass with one finger. I keep seeing his face when he opened the box, like he'd been punched and didn't know who threw it. He threw it himself, I said quietly. Years ago. He just didn't expect the echo to come back so loud. Sarah leaned forward, elbows on the table. You carried this alone for so long. How? How did you look at him every day, cook his supper, sleep beside him, knowing? I looked out the window at the dark yard. I didn't look at him. Not really. I looked past him, to you two, to the life we'd built, even if part of it was hollow. I told myself the hollow parts didn't touch the parts that mattered, and most days they didn't. You girls laughed, you grew up strong, you loved me. That was enough to keep breathing. Laura's eyes filled again, but it must have hurt every single day. It did, I admitted. Some mornings I'd wake up and the hurt felt fresh, like a cut that never scabbed over. But hurt is just pain with time on it. You learn to live with it. You don't let it live you. We sat quiet for a while. The clock ticked. A moth batted against the screen door. Outside, crickets picked up where the cicadas left off. Steady, stubborn music. Sarah broke the silence. What happens now, with him? I shrugged one shoulder. He'll go wherever men like him go when the mask falls off. Maybe to a motel tonight. Maybe back to that empty house in Marietta, if Vanessa lets him near the door. Maybe he'll try to fight the divorce, claim I tricked him, that the evidence is old, that he deserves half the house, half the savings. Let him try. My lawyer's got 30 years of receipts, sharper than any lawyer he could hire on short notice. Laura nodded slow. And us? The girls he raised, were still his, right? Blood or not? I reached across the table, took both their hands. Blood never defined us. Love did. He may have fathered you, walked you down aisles in his mind, taught you to ride bikes and throw curveballs. But the man who sat on that bench tonight, that wasn't the daddy who mattered. The daddy who mattered lived in the memories we keep, the good ones. We don't have to erase them. We just don't let him rewrite them. Sarah squeezed my hand. I'm angry, so angry. But I'm also relieved. Like I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop my whole life, and now it has. And the world didn't end. It didn't, I said. It just changed shape. We talked until after midnight. Small things at first, then bigger. How Sarah would tell her husband tomorrow, how Laura would call her supervisor for a few days off, how we'd clean the yard in the morning, pack up the leftovers, pretend normalcy until it felt real again. We laughed once, sharp, surprised, when Laura said, "At least the cobbler didn't go to waste. I'm taking the whole pan home." Around 1, they hugged me tight at the door. "We love you, Mama," Sarah whispered into my hair. "Love you more," I said back, the old line we'd used since they were toddlers. They left together in Sarah's SUV, taillights rad against the night. I stood on the porch until they turned the corner, then went back inside. The house felt different. Not empty, not haunted, just mine. For the first time in 51 years, every room belonged to me alone. I walked through the backyard one last time, picked up the scattered papers, DNA results, bank statements, the flash drive, tucked them back into the navy box, closed the lid, carried it upstairs to the attic, slid it under the floorboard beside the steel lockbox that had held everything for so long. Didn't lock it this time. No need. The secrets were out. The truth had won. Back downstairs, I poured one last small bourbon, sat on the front porch swing, the one Marcus had hung when we first moved in, the chain still creaking the same old song. The neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights hummed. A dog barked far off. I thought about the girl I'd been at 22, wide-eyed, trusting, saying I do under a magnolia tree in my mama's backyard. I thought about the woman I'd become, scarred, silent, strategic. I thought about the man who'd sat alone in my yard tonight, broken by his own choices. And I smiled, not bitter, not triumphant, just peaceful. 73 years old, and I'd just won the longest game of my life. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It isn't fireworks or screams or public tears. Sometimes it's patient. It's quiet. It waits in the shadows while the other side struts in the light. And when the moment comes, it steps forward with a small navy box and a calm smile. I sipped the bourbon, let the night air cool my skin. The swing creaked soft. The stars stayed put. And for the first time in 30 years, I slept without dreams of receipts or hidden houses or whispered phone calls. I slept like a woman who'd finally come home to herself. The next morning, the sun rose same as always, gold over Georgia rooftops, birds calling from the oaks. I made coffee, strong, black, drank it on the porch while the neighborhood woke up. Life went on, and so did I. Stronger, free, smiling.